Hey everyone, I'm Nökvi from Birds of Play, and welcome back to Whatever, a tale of translation. A series where I directly compare the Japanese and the English versions of Square's often underappreciated masterpiece, Final Fantasy VIII. If you think this series is just what the Doctor ordered, or that Final Fantasy VIII still deserves this type of in-depth content, don't forget to show your support in any way you feel comfortable with. You could subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, or just leave the video on play while you take a much-deserved nap after all the hardcore supporting you've been doing. Thanks for that. But speaking of the Doctor, let's start our tour of Balamb Garden with a visit to Dr. Katowaki. Squall, これから試験なんだろ? 経過はもういいのかい? So, just like usual, we have the Japanese and the English text boxes on display at the same time, as well as my more literal or alternative translation of the Japanese. Not much to say here about our visit to the infirmary, although I do feel that Dr. Katowaki or Katowaki-sensei's question in Japanese is a bit more appropriate when addressing someone that just got slashed across the face. Also, I feel that it's a little bit easier to read it in context with the earlier line about the test being today, as if she's asking whether it's truly alright for Squall to take the test today. And we're off to our next destination on the tour, the quad, where we will be reunited with Selphie after just having said goodbye to her earlier. Look at all that water. I guess it's quite appropriate that Balamb Garden is the place where you acquire Leviathan later on in the game. We're not going to be talking to everyone because, well, these NPCs actually don't have anything to say. Soon we'll be meeting Selphie. Hey girl, missed you. Ne, kimi gakki dekiru? Now, if you've played the game before, which I very much hope you have because I'm not sure how I would feel about this video series being the first experience you have with Final Fantasy VIII, Selphie asking whether we can play an instrument is of course foreshadowing or laying the groundwork for a very memorable musical scene much later in the game. Mushi shinai de yo? Let's make a mental note for now of how Selphie says this mushi shinai de yo, mushi meaning ignore, because later, when we visit the cafeteria, we will meet another character that uses this word a bit differently. Gakuen saiを進めたメンバーも各地の紛争に蹴り出されて今は一人もいないよ。唯一あの転校生が張り切ってるけどどうなるもんだか。He just says the same thing again. Let's go talk to Selphie. 私がやってること気になる? And we're gonna be nice? それなら君も学園祭実行委員になろう。ねえ、学園祭実行委員になろうよ。And we're gonna continue to be nice? なってもいい。やったー、じゃあ働いて。さあ、働く。単身の人手は貴重。Yeah, in the Japanese version, Selphie seems to harbor some ideas about the differences between males and females, which is quite common in Japan, I think. And I think it's not necessarily a negative thing, even though I'm not planning on getting into that kind of debate. But what I will say is that Selphie saying that a man's labor is valuable is in line with some other experiences that I have personally had when it comes to these kinds of issues. For example, many Japanese girls might show more gratitude to a man for carrying a heavy box for them. Some might even expect it, while some girls in the Western world might take offense to that, as if the man was trying to belittle them. But anyway, I don't plan on digging this hole any deeper, so we'll just continue. 君もしかしてあれ? 指示されないと動けないタイプ? Oh, if you only knew, Selphie, how deep your words cut. But anyway, now we're off to the cafeteria. We'll just run past this girl who is hopefully skating. And we'll just keep running because Squall is apparently always running. One of the few, but not the only student at Balamb Garden that loves to run all of the time. And here, when we are approaching the cafeteria, we can see a sign that is in Japanese. Another difference between the versions. Cypher, 何人?何が何でもいいのか?俺は水がいいもんよ。So, like a lot of manga and anime and Japanese video game characters, Raijin has a very distinct way of speaking that is accomplished by making the end of his sentences sound different than they usually would, and this is then translated as you know, which is a perfectly adequate translation even though it is different, and it conjures up ideas for me at least about this sort of stoner surfer dude, which is at least partly applicable to Raijin, considering that he looks like he goes to the beach quite a lot. Mushi. So in case you were wondering, Fujin also speaks a bit weirdly in the Japanese version, and when I say a bit, I mean very weirdly. Her way of talking is very stiff, and the phrases she uses are very unnatural. She also did this just a little bit earlier when she asked Cypher whether he wanted a drink, but now she is ignoring Raijin, just saying mushi. When we met Selphie just a little bit earlier, she used the same word, mushi, but she put it in a complete sentence, mushi shinai de yo. So the English translation translates Fujin's way of speaking quite adequately, I think, by just making use of one word at a time. Although it is a bit more difficult to translate the stiffness of the words Fujin actually chooses to use, that, like I said, are often these sort of unnaturally stiff and formal words that in addition rely on these sort of more complicated kanji characters. Squall じゃねえかよ。よ、風神が怒ってくるらしいもんよ。お前もどうだ?怒り。One interesting thing to note about Fujin and Raijin is that they are, to the best of my knowledge at least, the only two characters in the game that have their names written in kanji, or Chinese characters. Their names, of course, being clear allusions to the Japanese gods of wind and thunder that have the same names. Kanji names aren't all that common in Final Fantasy. For example, in Final Fantasy VII, only Hojo, along with Rufus and President Shinra, have kanji in their names, and I can't think of a single character from Final Fantasy IX or Final Fantasy X that would fit the bill. But who knows, maybe I'm forgetting someone. Squall, ゴニョゴニョゴニョゴニョ。風神は気の強いところがあるから、お前も気つけた方がいいもんよ。何件?いえ、何でもございません。Here, Raijin is addressing Fujin very formally out of fear or to appear more apologetic, using language one would usually reserve for one's superior. But I think that in this case it's mostly playful since Raijin doesn't normally address her in this manner. But this is a dimension of Japanese that is very difficult, if not impossible, to translate, since it has to do with different ways of saying the same thing, depending on the level of respect one is intending to show or expecting to be shown. Something that doesn't exist in the same way in English. And it's something that we should perhaps be more mindful of as we do this translation analysis. When Squall saw Cell come running in, a fellow indoor runner, he knew it was a match made in heaven. Again, if you understandably skipped over the directory scene in the last video and missed the explanation about the Japanese bread, the hot dogs that have become so famous in the English version of the game aren't actually hot dogs in the Japanese version, but rather a type of bread, often similar to a hot dog bun, that can have various fillings such as noodles, some curry, or even hot dogs. So even though Cell might actually be pining for some hot dogs, the Japanese pan or bread leaves more room for versatility, letting us maintain the illusion that Cell has developed a more diverse palate than a 5-year-old child. Although there's nothing wrong with a good hot dog once in a while, and I say this as someone from a country where the most famous restaurant is a hot dog stand. あんたね、来るの遅いよ。もう売り切れちゃったよ。畜生、まだやっちまったぜ。I find this very interesting as it actually changes how I think of Cell as a character, because in the Japanese version, he's not just cursing his circumstances by saying, damn, not again, but rather cursing his own part in creating them. He realizes that he's done something wrong, as is further emphasized by his next line. でもこれは致命傷だな。これはおばあさんまた来るよ。So in the English version he says that it's hopeless if you don't get here early, which still sounds rather passive to me, while in the Japanese version he identifies the root of the problem as heading out too late. Since Cell is one of the few students that commute to school instead of living in the dormitory, it could be said that he does have a harder time than most to get to school on time, but in the Japanese version he still makes a point of accepting his own responsibility in losing out. Good for you, Japanese Cell. Good for you. 今度はもうちょっと多く仕入れとくけど、報奨はできないよ。Seeing Cell walking instead of running indoors gave Squall pause about the future of their relationship. なもんよ。速度オーバーだな。今のやつを高速違反の現行犯で逮捕にしに行くぞ。よい。了解だもんよ。And now, with our bellies full, we head to the next spot. We're gonna skip the dormitory and go straight to the parking lot for an amazing reveal. Just past this hallway, and here we have it. Look at that on the wall, the kanji for parking. That's it. And now we're gonna catch that kid. We're gonna catch you, we're gonna catch you. No, 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 no. God damn it. Okay. We're gonna ambush him. And there he is. 走って、走って。誰にも負けない体力をつけてやるぞ。Here we see some creative liberties being taken with the translation, probably the biggest one so far. So, both the Japanese and the English versions depict an ambitious personality, the Japanese version being that of a boy driven to surpass his peers by working harder than anyone else, even though Squall is also always running around, while the English version sounds like a muscle man psyching himself up. Which one do you prefer, dear viewer? And yes, you are very, very dear to me. At least if you made it this far into the video. 私も小さい時からシードを目指してきたからね、こういう子の力になってあげたいって思うよ。私もシードになるの頑張るの。あれが噂のモンスターかよ。This must be referring to the infamous T-Rexor? 死ぬかと思った。2対1セットモンスターだしな、シートでもない俺にはちっと辛いかな。お前も行くなら気をつけた方がいいぜ。But we're going to the library instead of fighting. 生徒ナンバー41269スコール。問題児か。今日はシード最終試験だったな。トリップ教科のまたしているのだろうか。このところで油を売っているな。So selling oil is a Japanese phrase for dawdling or loafing around, and the story I heard about where this saying comes from is that in the olden days when shopping for oil, it took quite a while to pour the oil from the barrels into containers for the customer, so that time was also spent chatting away. In regard to the translation itself, however, this might be an example of the Japanese text having a bit more flavor or literary flourish, although it is too early to tell just from this single line, especially since there isn't much else to substantiate that claim at the moment, so it's not like the Japanese text is especially literary. But speaking of literary and literature, let's go to the library, our last big stop before going to meet Quistis by the main gate. 図書館内では大きな声で話すことを食べたり飲んだりすることを走り回ることが禁止されています。それと返却期間を守りましょう。席取りはやめましょう。 Japan is of course a heavily populated country, and sometimes it can be a bit difficult to find an open space, whether it's in a cafeteria, a food hall, or a library. The practice of saving seats is quite common, and this is often accomplished simply by leaving your belongings where you intend to sit, which is also a testimony to how safe Japan considers itself to be. In the Japanese version of Final Fantasy VIII, however, we can see that seat saving is an ongoing problem at the Balamb Garden Library. The rules not just stating that you shouldn't fight over seats, but rather that you should stop saving seats. How do you save seats where you're from?
今度の授業、図書館のマナーの説明なんです。小さな子供たちに教えてあげるんです。私の説明できちんと分かってくれるか、とっても心配です。
質問。昔悪い魔女が統治していったっていう国がエスターだったよな。I don't really have anything to say about the translation at this point, but I just wanted to point out how this is one of the examples of how Final Fantasy VIII delivers its lore and foreshadowing for what is to come via dialogue or information that is stashed away, sort of off the beaten path, meaning you have to go look for it. So here we have this mention of the sorceress or majo in Japanese, which is typically translated as witch, right here at the beginning of the game. Some people might find this type of hidden information annoying, just like the data logs from Final Fantasy XIII or something, but in the case of Final Fantasy VIII, I really love it because it really adds to the replayability of the game and lets you feel like you are uncovering secrets. Also, how do you feel about the difference between the terms witch and sorceress?
この魔女はどうなったんだっけ？誰がこの魔女をどうにかしたんだっけ？それで授業ではやってなかったっけ？その授業の日は休んじゃったから何かなんだかわからないよ。
ふわー！テストがあるんだよ。しかも追試だよ。ついてねえよ。しかも俺一人だ。ふわー！ And he just says the same thing again. Let's talk to the girl.
席取ったのはいいんだけど、鶴がなかなか戻ってこない。
No, saving a seat isn't alright, although I suspect she knows that, and that's the reason she is so distraught. This poor girl is caught up in a power struggle between the library staff and her study partner. Pray for her.
早くしないと、図書家に怒られちゃうよ。
And now that we've done the whole circle, excluding the dormitory, we are going to the main gate to meet up with Quistis, so we can go to the fire cavern. But first let's talk to this guy.
今時のシードは体力より頭脳だね。
And let's talk to the card guy as well.
なあ、知ってるか？この学科にはカードクラブ団、通称 CC 団ってのがあるんだよ。カードの好きな連中が集まり、日夜強者を探しているって話さ。CC 団にカード勝負を挑まれるってのは、カードマニアには名誉なことだぜ。
Does this mean I have to do the card side quest in Japanese and English? What has my life become?
わしはガーデンが成立された時からずっとここにおるんじゃ。
So we can tell that this guy is very old from the way he speaks in Japanese, ending his sentences with ja. If you couldn't tell just by looking at him through the glass. But I know that he has another line and we're going to try to get that out of him.
毎年悪ガキどもが入ってくるからしっかりがいがあるわい。
He sounds like a lovely person. I think every school should have a guy like this, who enjoys scolding the children. It gives his life meaning. Running. Well, running outside is sort of okay, I guess.
お前たち見てると俺も頑張らなきゃとか思うよ。
So Squall is apparently a problem child at the same time He is inspiring other students to do better. And now we made it to Quistis, and she's going to give us a tutorial. さあ、行きましょうか。湿気に使う炎の洞窟はここから東に行ったところにあるわ。Psych! She didn't give us a tutorial because the Japanese version is different from the English version in this regard. But please join me next time as we visit the fire cavern as well as the information-packed study panels. And who knows, maybe we'll even make it to the town of Balamb. But until next time, thanks for watching and supporting this project. Also, you can click the bell if you don't want to miss a video, but either way, I'll be sure to promote it as much as I possibly can. But again, thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.